Okay, so today we are rounding decimals. So our first example is to round 5 and 238 thousandths to the nearest hundredth. So on the side here I have just kind of some sayings that are going to help us in some directions as we do our rounding here. So the first thing I do is mark my place. So it asks me to round to the nearest hundredth. So I'm going to go ahead and underline the hundredth in the problem. So here's my tenths, here's my hundredth. So I marked my place. This line is where my number is going to end when I'm all the way done. So I'm going to have 5 decimal point, a number, and a number. So it's going to end at the hundredths, and that's where I'm rounding. The next thing I'm going to do is look next door. So this is my place right there at the number 3, and I'm going to look to the number to the right, and it's an 8. So my next saying is if it's 5 or more, we're going to raise the score, meaning we're going to bump that underlined number up 1, but if it's 4 or less, we're going to let it rest, meaning it's going to stay the same. So when I'm looking at here, I have my 3, I look to the number next door, it's an 8. It's higher than a 5, so 5 or more, raise the score. So that means I'm going to take that 3 and I'm going to bump it up to a 4. So now when I rewrite my number, that's the only number that's changing is the underlined number. When I round 5 and 238 thousandths to the nearest hundredth, my answer is 5 and 24 hundredths. Now that 8, whatever is after, does become a 0, or you just do not include it in your answer because I want to end in that hundredths place. So mark your place, look next door, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So let's practice a few here. So I have round to the nearest tenth. That's going to be our first one here. So what I like to do, again, mark my tenth, which is a 4. Then I'm going to look next door. I'm going to look at that 3. Now remember, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. And because it's a 3, that means I'm going to let it rest. So that 4 is going to stay the same. So when I'm done, my answer is 2 and 4 tenths. Remember, whatever that underlined number is, that's where your number is ending. So that 3 told me to keep the 4 the same. The next one, I have 3 and 945 thousandths. Round to the nearest tenth here. So I'm going to underline my 9. I'm going to look next door, and that is a 4. So again, I'm going to keep my 9, let it rest, keep it the same. I'm rounding to the 10th place, so I'm stopping at the tenths. So both of these were 4 or less, let it rest, meaning they're staying the same. Now I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so I'm going to underline my hundredths place, tenths, hundredths, which is my 8, and I am going to look to the next number, which is a 1, and again, that is less than 4, 4 or less, let it rest. So when I write my answer here, everything stays the same, and I'm going to let that 8 rest, meaning it is not changing. My next number, I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, so I'm going to underline my hundredth. I'm going to look to the number next door, and it's an 8. Remember, 5 or more, raise the score. So when I write down this number as I'm rounding, I'm going to take that 3 and bump it up to a 4. I'm going to raise it 1. And again, that's where I'm ending. So my answer is 7 and 24 hundredths. And again, when you round to the hundredths place, you end with a hundredth. When you round to a tenth, you end in the tenths place. And here is your lesson practice where you're trying rounding to the nearest tenth and rounding to the nearest hundredth.